This Star Trek character was originally intended as Voyager's Spock replacement. A Star Trek Voyager character was originally meant to be Captain Catherine Janeway's, Kate Mulgrew version of Spock, Leonard Nimoy. On Star Trek, the original series, the half-Vulcan/half-human Spock represented the outsider, and many fans related to him because of this. Spock was caught between two worlds, and sometimes felt like he didn't truly fit in either one. Spock also acted as a foil for Captain Kirk, as the Vulcan's logical stoicism balanced out Kirk's more impulsive tendencies. Nearly every Star Trek show since TOS has had a similar outsider character, whose presence allowed the show to dive deeper into what it means to be human. Star Trek: The Next Generation had the android LT commander Data, Brent Spiner, who wanted nothing more than to be human. Star Trek: Deep Space Nine had Constable Odo, Rene Auberjonois, a changeling who struggled to find his identity. And Star Trek: Voyager had 7 of 9, Jerry Ryan, the former Borg drone who had to relearn how to be human. Star Trek: Voyager wanted 7 of 9 to be Janeway's Spock. Did it work? With a character as popular as Spock, it's no surprise that subsequent Star Trek shows would try to recreate that phenomenon. Not only was Spock a great character on his own, but he also helped create the perfect dynamic with Captain Kirk and Dr. Leonard McCoy, DeForest Kelley. Star Trek: Voyager's 7 of 9 was originally meant to serve a similar purpose as Spock. In her new book, Star Trek: Open a Channel, A Woman's Trek, Nana Visitor spoke with Voyager executive producer Brannon Braga about 7 of 9's original purpose. Reads her quote below: like Spock, 7 became one of Star Trek's most popular characters, and Star Trek: Voyager's ratings improved after she joined the cast. 7 also added conflict to the show, as it took Voyager's crew time to get used to a former Borg drone being on the ship. Jerry Ryan often delivered 7's line in the same emotionless monotone that Spock regularly used, further cementing her role as an outsider. Still, 7 and Janeway did not have the same type of friendship that Spock had with Kirk. Janeway took on a mentor role for 7, but they also had their fair share of conflicts. Why Kate Mulgrew had problems with Jerry Ryan's 7 of 9 on Star Trek Voyager. Kate Mulgrew initially felt trepidation when Jerry Ryan joined the cast of Star Trek Voyager in Season 4. Mulgrew had established Janeway as an intelligent and hard-working captain, whose looks were irrelevant when it came to doing her jobs. Mulgrew felt that 7 of 9, with her skin-tight bodysuits and obvious attractiveness, would undermine the type of lead Mulgrew had tried to build. Mulgrew has since taken responsibility for her treatment of Jerry Ryan on Voyager's set, but her initial misgivings were understandable. While 7 of 9's sex appeal was part of the reason why Voyager's ratings increased after she joined the cast, 7 developed into a complex character in her own right. And 7's sometimes contentious relationship with Captain Janeway ultimately benefited both characters. Fans related to 7 of 9 for many of the same reasons they had related to Spock, and Jerry Ryan made the character so much more than her impractical catsuits. It's difficult to imagine the show Star Trek Voyager would have been without 7 of 9, and the former Borg drone remains a fan favorite even today. When Star Trek Voyager debuted in 1995, it sought to follow in the footsteps of its predecessors by maintaining the essential formula of its earlier shows, while bringing something new to the Star Trek universe. One of the most essential ingredients in Star Trek has been the inclusion of a character whose identity bridges the gap between humanity and something other, often providing a unique, detached perspective on human behaviors and emotions. In Star Trek, the original series, this role was filled by Spock, the half-Vulcan, half-human science officer. Spock's cold logic, contrasted with the emotional intensity of Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy, created one of the most iconic dynamics in television history. When Star Trek: The Next Generation arrived, this role was reimagined through the character of Data, an android striving to understand humanity despite his own lack of emotion. His curiosity and confusion about human nature mirrored Spock's distance, though Data's journey had a more exploratory angle, often showing him longing to become more human. With Voyager, the creators faced the challenge of introducing their own character who could serve as a successor to these iconic figures. That character was Lieutenant Tuvok, a full-blooded Vulcan who was designed in many ways as Voyager's answer to Spock. Although the shows were separated by nearly 3 decades, the parallels between the two characters were deliberate. Tuvok's Vulcan heritage placed him firmly in the tradition of logical, emotionally detached officers, but he also brought his own depth and uniqueness to the role. The intention was clear, to build upon the archetype Spock had established, but to expand it in new and interesting ways. Tuvok. The logical successor, Tuvok, portrayed by Tim Russ, was more than just a Spock stand-in. He was a reimagined version of the Vulcan ideal. As a Vulcan security officer serving aboard the USS Voyager under Captain Janeway, Tuvok's presence fulfilled several roles. Like Spock, he represented an outsider's view of human behavior, offering logical solutions where emotions might cloud judgment. However, Tuvok was also distinctly different from Spock in important ways. For one, Tuvok was not a hybrid like Spock, but a fully Vulcan character. His identity as a Vulcan was not conflicted by the duality of a human side. This gave the writers of Voyager the chance to explore Vulcan culture and philosophy in ways that the original series never had the chance to. Where Spock often struggled with his human emotions, attempting to suppress them with logic, Tuvok's pure Vulcan heritage meant he had mastered emotional suppression and the practice of mental discipline. One of Tuvok's most notable traits was his role as a teacher and mentor, particularly toward characters like Ensign Harry Kim and Neelix. His calm demeanor and wisdom gave him a gravitas that was different from Spock's more internal struggles. Tuvok's interactions with Neelix in particular often mirrored the famous dynamic between Spock and Dr. McCoy, where an emotional, boisterous character clashed with a cool, rational one. However, the difference was that Tuvok's disapproval of Neelix's exuberance was more grounded in his deep adherence to Vulcan customs, rather than an inner conflict between human and Vulcan tendencies. The search for humanity in many ways, Tuvok was envisioned as the natural next step for a Star Trek character in the Spock mold. Where Spock had always struggled with his emotions, Tuvok had already completed that journey. As a Vulcan well into middle age, Tuvok had already embraced the suppression of emotion, unlike Spock, who was still working to reconcile his human and Vulcan sides. This made Tuvok a character whose story was less about a personal internal struggle and more about his interactions with others, both human and alien. At the same time, Voyager added a twist by introducing the character of Seven of Nine later in the series. She became the true outsider character in the Spock mold that the show initially sought. Seven, a human who had been assimilated by the Borg, represented a more direct successor to Data's arc. Her struggle to regain her humanity after years of living in the cold, emotionless collective of the Borg mirrored Spock's lifelong journey to balance his Vulcan logic with human emotion. Once Seven became a central character in Voyager, Tuvok's role shifted slightly, allowing Seven to take on more of the emotional discovery arc, while Tuvok remained steadfast in his Vulcan identity. Conclusion: a different legacy. While Tuvok may have initially been conceived as Voyager's Spock replacement, his character evolved into something distinct. He wasn't just a successor, but a character that offered new perspectives on Vulcan philosophy and the dynamics aboard a starship. His lack of an internal struggle, unlike Spock or Data, allowed him to serve more as a stabilizing force within the crew. Yet, it also allowed the writers to explore a different side of the Spock archetype, one of mastery and discipline rather than inner conflict. Ultimately, while Tuvok carried the legacy of Spock in Voyager, he also forged his own path.